In the sprawling empire of Rome, wealth was not only measured in gold, silver, or land. It was measured in people. Within the high walls of marble villas and across the vast plains of Italy's countryside, the most constant presence was the silent labor of slaves. Two worlds, two fates, household slaves and farm slaves, both essential, both exploited, yet their lives unfolded in utterly different theaters of Roman society. Step first into the atrium of a patrician's home. Sunlight spills through an open roof, glinting on polished floors. Here, household slaves moved like shadows, their every gesture rehearsed, their every glance watched. They were cooks, maids, hairdressers, musicians, nurses, and tutors, human instruments of luxury. To own such slaves was not simply a convenience, it was a declaration of status. A wealthy Roman might own dozens, even hundreds, each trained to perform specialized tasks. The cost of these slaves reflected their value. A skilled cook from the East might sell for a fortune equivalent to a small farm. A beautiful maid, chosen not for strength but for appearance, could fetch a price higher than that of a soldier. The most prized of all, the trusted steward or secretary, might cost more than entire herds of livestock. Yet, despite their higher cost and their presence in luxurious surroundings, household slaves were still property. They polished silver they would never eat from. They poured wine at banquets they were never invited to join. Their lives were spent serving a master's whims, their worth calculated like fine furniture, their dignity traded for their owner's comfort. They could be rewarded with better food, fine clothing, or even freedom, but just as easily they could be punished, beaten, or sold away if they displeased. For them, proximity to luxury only emphasized their captivity. Now, journey beyond the city walls, into the countryside, where Rome's appetite for grain, olives, and wine demanded an entirely different kind of slave. Here lay the latifundia, vast estates stretching farther than the eye could see, worked by hundreds of slaves. Theirs was a life of endless toil. From dawn to dusk, under the burning sun, they bent their backs in the fields. Unlike the carefully trained household slaves, these men and women were bought cheaply, often in bulk, like livestock. Their prices were low because their lives were short. Roman landowners treated them as expendable, working them to exhaustion, knowing replacements could be purchased after every conquest. The contrast was brutal. Where a wealthy senator's cook might cost the equivalent of a fortune, a farm laborer might be valued at no more than a few months' wages of a common soldier. Their worth was calculated not in skills or beauty, but in endurance. How many years of work could be extracted before the body failed? To the masters, they were numbers in a ledger. To the slaves, the fields were prisons without walls. And yet Rome's very survival rested on their shoulders. Without the endless labor of farm slaves, the empire's cities would starve. The bread that fed Rome's masses, the oil that lit its lamps, the wine that filled its cups, all were born of sweat and blood in the countryside. Rome's grandeur was built on their silent sacrifice. There was another layer of cruelty. Household slaves, for all their lack of freedom, sometimes had paths to manumission. A trusted steward might one day be freed as a reward for loyalty. A nurse who raised generations of children might be honored with her liberty in old age. Farm slaves, however, rarely lived long enough to hope for freedom. Their lives burned quickly, consumed by the relentless demand for harvests. They were bodies in the machine, fed into the latifundia's hunger. The comparison to later centuries is chilling. Rome's plantations foreshadowed the brutal systems of slavery that would scar history millennia later, from the Caribbean to the American South. The same logic applied. Human lives reduced to economic units, fields worked until death, profits feeding the wealth of the powerful. Rome's version may have been the blueprint, a dark inheritance passed down through time. And still, one must ask, did the masters ever see the contradiction? In their villas, surrounded by art, literature, and philosophy, they prided themselves on civilization. Yet, in their fields, men and women lived and died as beasts of burden. Was Rome's culture, celebrated as the pinnacle of the ancient world, not built upon this fundamental hypocrisy? For the masters, slaves were assets. For the slaves, they were life sentences, some in luxury, others in dirt, but all in chains. And as the empire grew, so did its hunger for more. More cooks for banquets, more maids for baths, more laborers for farms. Rome's greatness expanded in step with its bondage, each new conquest fueling the system, each victory feeding the engine of slavery. The paradox was stark. The empire that gave the world its law, its roads, its architecture, and its literature had, at its core, an economy of human lives. And in the quiet corners of villas and in the open fields of estates, that economy was written in sweat, in suffering, and in silver.